to Conversations with Consequences, now on EWTN Radio. I'm your host, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Mary Fiorito.
And we are so blessed to be joined today by Claire Lai. She is the daughter of the one and only Jimmy Lai, who we have been covering extensively. I've written several articles about his case, and really the whole world is watching his trial and is so inspired by him and his courage. And so we're so grateful to you, Claire, for joining us today and for giving us your time.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here.
So, Claire, I know that just in the last few days, there's been more legal developments, and we're interested in that. We want to get into that. But first, we'd love to hear just from you, how is your father doing, and how are you doing?
My father, when he went in, he was a robust man, and his health has deteriorated a lot. I've sort of gone through the litany of things that health-wise that he's going through, like his back pains, like diabetes, his infections, his heat rashes, and so on. But by far the issue we're the most worried about are his heart issues. He started experiencing heart palpitations around June 2025, and he experienced them every 2 or 3 days. It wasn't until August that tests were done, and including blood tests, and it showed that he had a fast degree heart block, which is usually benign in people who are young and fit. But my father is 78, and he's really not. It. He had a blood disorder, he had an enlarged spleen, and he had damage to that which protects like your red blood cells, and even a lot other things in his blood profile wasn't and I compared it to his pre-detention records, and they it wasn't as good, and just the government has said that Hong Kong government has said that he hasn't complained of heart palpitations since August. But even taking them at their word, it's something that should have been continuously checked on, and it hasn't been. And my father has been in solitary confinement since the 3rd of December 2020. So that's the start of incarceration. And there's well documented research that has been recognized by the courts, at least in Hong Kong, to have detrimental and potentially fatal impacts on your health. But the conditions in which he's kept in solitary have just gotten worse over time. He is now in a cell by himself, well, solitary, but it's also like 30 to 40% smaller than most. It's older as well. It should give you access to natural sunlight, but in his case, the window is deliberately sealed, the window that leads outside. He used to get 1 hour of exercise a day outside, so he gets fresh air and sunlight there. But now the sky is blocked off when he does that exercise. The only natural sunlight he gets really is from some kind of like reflections in the corridor. But you can barely call it that. But and the entire floor is cleared in his case. There's no one to his top or bottom. So really the only social interactions he gets are when he gets family visits, and that is limited to 24 hours a year. But there were new prison rules implemented in summer, and we don't know how that will affect his visits yet, but it does make some of the visits a lot more discretionary on the part of the authorities. And also, when he's being moved around in prison, he is covered basically from head to toe or to ankle in a black cloth. It's like a thick black cloth so that people don't see him and he doesn't see or anything or anyone. And so the conditions he's kept in have just gotten worse. There's no sign of it changing, and if anything, we're just worried that it will get worse, because that's sort of the pattern that we've had.
Well, one of the things that's become so clear over these past years is that his ability to persist in his courageous stand for freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, is his faith. And he was not imprisoned because of his faith necessarily, but his faith has become really a beacon to the world. Tell us a little bit. We know for a while he was doing these beautiful drawings, and then they took his pencils away. That hasn't in any way stopped his witness. I've been in offices where people have them framed, and they're viral all over the internet. But what are some of the ways without having regular access to the sacraments, that he continues to sustain his faith?
So it's, I just on the point that he's not in prison because of his faith. I mean, he's not, but a lot of what he does, I mean, even the choice of staying in Hong Kong, then it's a certain amount of courage that can't really be explained, unless you're guided by the Holy Spirit, and it is very much his faith that continues to give him the strength which I mean, the authorities don't like. He is still drawing. He's just not able to send them out anymore. So from around September 2022, he wasn't allowed to send them, and he drew the crucifixion, and he drew the Blessed Mother at the Annunciation, and he was starting to draw the Pieta, which I know he's still practicing, but
Mm.
but he's not able to get any of those out anymore. Um, and he he wakes up at midnight or around then every night to pray. And he wakes up like before the crack of dawn, even just to read the gospel. He At first, he would ask the guards if they could turn on the light so he could read clearly, because one of the things is his eyesight is failing. And At first they said yes, and after around a year they said no. So instead, he leans against the door, and there's like a little window on the door, and there's some light coming in, and he makes out the words that way. And it's not good for his back or his waist, but it brings him a great deal of joy, and it's so yeah, and we're very grateful for that. I mean, I mean, it's that isn't it, and he reads a lot of books. I mean, Ratzinger, oh gosh, Fulton Sheen, got what's his name? The author who wrote Seven Story Mountains. Um, gosh, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I think
Thomas
it.
Merton. Thomas
Yes,
Merton.
sorry.
Sure.
And even even like it back when I was in Hong Kong, I mean, sometimes he would ask me to send certain articles. I mean, he reads Newman, he reads gosh, he just yeah, just George Weigel, who I know is your colleague, and
Yes.
he reads uh, uh who was it? Peter Seward, his autobiography of Pope Benedict, and um, yeah, he reads a lot, and yeah, it gives him a great deal of joy, and he doesn't we're not allowed to enter a rosary for him. We haven't been allowed since the start, but like yesterday it was Cardinal Zen's birthday, and uh I said that I would offer my rosary to him along with some friends, and he said he said that he would too, although without a rosary. And
Mm.
um there are times when there was once he was in the shower, and it was he because he's older, and he has back pains, and he's a lot weaker, and he just couldn't stand up. And it was right around the time we were trying to enter the rosary for him, and uh he prayed as though prayed to the he prayed to Our Lady, and he as though he had a rosary, and
Mm.
and he was suddenly able to stand up without pain. And that there, like, we have typhoon seasons in Hong Kong, so there are there are times when the cell gets like everything in the cell gets wet, like even the place he sleeps, the clothes and everything. And the one thing that remained dry was his Word on Fire, Bishop by Bishop Barron. And
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, so oh yeah, Bishop Barron, he reads a lot of Bishop Barron as well, sorry. But so yeah, I mean it's I mean it's so when things happen, when we hear about things happening in prison, and as his family, we sort of want to go in there and sort of like physically help do something to help. But I mean we're very lucky, we're very lucky, and our good Lord is looking after him, and we're just we're extremely blessed. And back when he was still able to send the drawings, there were other political prisoners in Hong Kong, and he would draw pictures of the crucifixion or
mm,
to them, and sort of on the other side he would write down, like like how how they should start praying, and so on,
mhm.
and what and it's and some of them have converted, which means a great deal to him and to our family as well. And so it's his physical body is breaking down, but it's his faith that protects his mind and his soul, and we're just extremely grateful for that.
Well, Claire, just listening to this, I am feeling so many emotions, and that you just said after sharing with us this horrific situation your dear father is in. You said we're blessed, and I am just so struck, as someone who tries to live out my faith and hope that in a similar situation I would say the same thing. But tell me, how are you and your mom? How are you getting through this just with your own relationship with the Lord? Your father is obviously a tremendous witness and he's drawing others to Christ. But tell me, how are you yourself doing and how is your mother?
It's I mean I'm naturally quite like introverted person, but and the last few years have been a bit tough, of course on my mom, and on the family. But and I think we know that our strength isn't ours. I mean it comes,
Hmm.
a lot of things that have happened, it doesn't come from, I mean it doesn't come from our own strength, and it's because yeah, our good Lord is looking after our family. So and I mean we're just very grateful. And one of my mom's favorite saints, Saint Teresa of Avila, or was it Teresa of Lisieux? I can't remember, because they're two of her
Yes, Big Teresa and Little Teresa, they call them. Yeah.
But one of them said, everything that happens is a grace.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think it isn't until these 5 years that I realized just how true that is.
Mm.
so tell us a little bit about your mother and your father. This is something that I know he's a convert, and I know your mother, before he converted, was a woman of great faith. But can you tell us a little bit about his conversion story and how they grew in their faith together before this terrible trial?
Well, he converted the year of the handover, and I think that was a handover of Hong Kong,
Hmm.
and it was a time when a lot of people had certain doubts and had certain fears, and there was a lot of uncertainty. And I think, I mean, if the Blessed Mother has, I think one of the greatest lessons, not maybe not the greatest, but one of the lessons is that there is nothing that conquers it quite as much as God's love, and I think he was ready to receive it then. And since then, I mean, it's you know it's yeah, a lot of the ways as a family we lived out our faith was very like not like very normal things, like we would pray the rosary together, we would pray, we would pray every night together, or we would read the Bible together, or things like, or like it's just like very and obviously we'd go to mass, and actually one thing that he really wants to do is go to midnight mass, which he hasn't been able to. um
Mm.
but it's just and whenever we visit him around Christmas time, and we tell him that we went to Christmas mass, he gets a little bit envious, although he's very happy for us. He's and he gets a bit envious because he very desperately wants to. And you know even just little, you know um some things that I sometimes I often take for granted, like even getting the Eucharist, like
Yeah.
it isn't until these few years that I just realized, because you know at least for me, when I grew up, I mean, it's we learned about the importance of the Eucharist. And it's receiving it is how we come into communion with Christ. And it's just it's just you learn about the value of it, but you very rarely learn about it as a right, because it's so self-evident. And
Hmm.
I mean, I know that the government has said that my dad gets it regularly, but in the last 2.5 years um he got it 9 or 11 times, which is, I mean, even in a year, that would be pretty abysmal. For and we we need it at least once a week, which is it 50, yeah, 50, so that and on the yeah, I mean, we need it at least once a week. And that's not and it's not due to a shortage of people willing to administer it. It's just
Hmm. Of
yeah,
course.
yeah.
And Claire, your father has become sort of this icon of freedom for so many people around the world. And I'm sitting here listening to you, as an American citizen with all the freedoms I enjoy, and I'm feeling rather guilty about that. And I'm asking you, what I know, of course, count on our prayers, but what can we as American citizens do to help your father to make his case better known? I mean, I know it's had a lot of publicity, but there should be an international outrage over this. What
uh,
can we do to help? What are the things that you think anyone listening to this interview could do to help your father?
I mean, um firstly, I mean, thank you so much. And it's from a lot of people, especially here. A lot of people have told me that they've prayed for my father and our family. And my father has on many occasions said that it's what sustains him. So if people can spare a prayer for him, we'd be extremely grateful. I mean, and we are very grateful. That there are times when I went to visit, and physically he wasn't doing well, and I would worry, and he would tell me, he was like, I'm feeling, he'd tell me, I'm feeling good because a lot of people are praying for me, and he can feel it. So I'm just extremely grateful. And like, thank you so much for having me on, just helping spread the word about my father. I mean, we're just extremely, extremely grateful.
Well, Claire, we are so grateful to you for your time and to your own courageous witness of your father's story. We know that you've really been out there in the press, and you saying you're an introvert, that I know is all the more inspiring. But we're so grateful to you. We're so grateful for the example of your father. And we certainly are praying, and we definitely call on our listeners to continue praying for this wonderful, holy man who's unjustly imprisoned in horrific conditions by the Chinese Communist Party. But we also take comfort in knowing that there's nothing they can do that'll stifle his witness.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you, Claire. Thank you. Where, I mean, is there any place that people who are wanting to find out more about his case, that they can look to or follow on social media?
Yeah, so the support Jimmy Lai page is on X, and it's on Instagram, and there's a support Jimmy Lai website as well. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much. And
Okay. And
um
please assure your mother of our prayers too.
Absolutely, she'll be so grateful. I mean, she is so grateful, and as is our father. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences, where I am joined by our resident chaplain, Monsignor Roger Landry, who is also the U.S. Director for the Pontifical Mission Society. And we're here to talk today about a special octave that a lot of people don't know about. Monsignor, can you tell us about that?
This Sunday, beginning January 18th, we're going to be starting the octave of prayer for Christian unity. This goes all the way back to 1910, and it needs to be at the heart of any Catholic's approach to the faith. When we look at Holy Thursday night, Jesus very consciously was on the vigil of his execution. He knew what all the prophets had said, how he would suffer. And instead, really, of prioritizing thinking about that and getting ready for it, he was praying during the first Mass for us to be one. 3 times that St. John's recorded, he said, Father, may they be one, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they be so completely one. And then he gave us the reasons, so that the world may know that you sent me and that you love me as much as you love them. Jesus was saying that if we want to convince the world that the Son of God has come into the world and that God indeed loves us so much that he didn't spare his own son, but handed him over for us all so that we could be saved, that the way to do that would be our communion, our unity. And he prayed for us to have not just some type of unity. He wanted us to have the same type of unity that existed between him and the Father, who is the Holy Spirit, of course, that substantial union between the Father and the Son. And Jesus wouldn't pray for something impossible. If he were praying for us to have a communion as profound as the communion of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it must be possible. But we know, of course, that it's not. And the devil, the great divider, is constantly trying to divide us. And look at what he's done. First, the first Christians approximated that unity. They prayed together, they ate together, they made pilgrimages to Jerusalem together, and then very powerfully, voluntarily, they sacrificed some of their own property, laid the proceeds at the feet of the apostles to care for their new brothers and sisters by baptism as their fellow spiritual family members most needed. Just like most of us from functional families would easily sacrifice for our loved ones if they were in need. That's what they were doing. But the devil, who divided the first family of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, constantly tries to divide the church. And the history of the church, which is a history of so many saints and so many extraordinary achievements, is likewise a history of disunity. 1054, the Great Schism between the Orthodox and Catholics. 1517, the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. And today, the scandal of what I call adjectival Catholicism, that there are so many Catholics who define themselves as I'm traditionalist or I'm progressive, I'm liberal, I'm conservative, I am Latino, I am Irish, like that there's something distinct there. And we don't emphasize the community as much. And this is a time for us to pray for the healing of the church in all the ways that disunity has hurt the church. Every form, everything that we do in order to turn people away from Jesus, those missed opportunities we have to bring people into greater communion, we need to pray for all of us to become true agents on Jesus's team. And like, we need to ask ourselves during this octave, do I really care? Am I losing any sleep over the fact that there's this split between the Orthodox and Catholics, or 35,000 different Protestant denominations in the U.S., that we've got something like the Society of St. Pius X, which is in an irregular situation with the church, that we have so many Catholics, let's just look at Minneapolis, who are fighting against each other, forgetting that Jesus calls us to be true peacemakers, because the ones against whom we're fighting are actually, in most cases, our baptized brothers and sisters. There's so much for us to do, but prayer for Christian unity has got to be at the center of all that we're doing as Catholics. And we now have a Holy Father who took his motto, in illo uno unum, one in the one Christ, and whose real work to try to bring about peace in the world begins with peace inside the church. And so I just get excited every year for the church's octave of Christian unity. But I also occasionally get discouraged that it's on the periphery of many Catholics' lives. And even for daily mass goers, they might go all 8 days of the octave, not hear anything, not have the beautiful masses in the missal that the Catholic Church uses of prayers for Christian unity, which are specially meant to be used to lead the prayer of the church during these days. And so I thought it would be good for us on Conversations with Consequences to try to provoke a consequential conversation with regard to church unity.
Are there any novenas that are attached to this special time?
Well, there are octave prayers. So octave's just one day short of a novena.
Right. Sorry. Yeah.
There are lots of prayers that are available on the internet. Just put prayers for the octave of Christian unity, and I just always put Catholic in there. Most of the prayers are prayers that Catholics and non-Catholics could pray, but just get the real good Catholic prayers and then do it like a novena for the 8 days of this, praying for what Jesus himself prayed for. And if you don't want to look it up, I just urge you and all our fellow listeners today to just pray that prayer, ut unum sint, that John Paul II loved, coming from Jesus' words, Father, may they be one. Father, may they be one. Father, may we be one. Because that's the way in which the mission of the church will be strengthened. Our preaching about the fact that God has come into the world and that God really loves us is going to be able to be seen in the way we Christians concretely love and sacrifice for each other. If they see us tearing each other apart, rather than sacrificing like the members of the early church, it's going to be harder to convince the world that Jesus is the sole Savior. But if, like in that early church, they see us living like the first Christians did, all 8.1 billion will join.
Thank you so much, Monsignor Landry.
You're welcome, Betsy. Happy octave of the prayer of Christian unity.
Welcome to Conversations with Consequences, now on EWTN Radio. I'm your host, Mary Fiorito.
And I'm Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Betsy Fetris.
And it's always fun to catch up together as a team, especially with some of the big headlines we are seeing this week. So why don't we just start by touching just very briefly on the sad death of the controversial but very talented Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams. He passed away this week, a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. And shortly before his death was announced, he had announced personally that he had accepted what is called commonly Pascal's wager, which is named for the Catholic philosopher Blaise Pascal. So the Pascal's wager essentially challenges someone who is not a believer to give belief a chance, because if you, for example, say, well, God doesn't exist, and whether or not I believe in it, it has no, bearing on my afterlife or life. But if God does exist and you say, I am willing to accept the fact that God exists, and I'll accept him, you lose nothing, but you can gain everything at your death. So there has been quite a bit of commentary on social media in particular about Mr. Adams, who I believe identified as an agnostic most of his life, but seems to have been accompanied by someone who was at least informed enough to present him with Pascal's wager. And so he admitted in his statement before his death that any skepticism I have about reality would certainly be instantly answered if I wake up in heaven. Now, of course, right, we don't ever want to presume God's mercy, but also I do think we need to be open to the fact that God's mercy is really beyond our comprehension, which is why that Divine Mercy devotion, I think, was not controversial at the time, but certainly very challenging for some people. And St. Faustina points out in her diaries that, at the end of life, at that moment of death, God calls to each soul 3 times. The soul has freedom to accept him or reject him. And if they reject him, God will accept that final decision on the part of the soul. But that's how extensive and extravagant God's mercy is, that he comes for each of us and calls to us 3 times. And so it's led to kind of a debate between Catholic and Protestant theology.
Right.
And some people have cited the good thief or the vineyard workers who show up at 5 o'clock and still get the full day's pay. But it's also sort of led to some interesting conversations about deathbed conversions.
Right. I always like to read about the Hollywood stars and literary figures, whether it's Oscar Wilde or John Wayne, that at the end of their life, when they know that they're going to meet their maker, they make some, pretty humble decisions sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that was interesting about him near the end, he was a lifelong advocate of physician-assisted suicide. And then he had said he was, I think for a while, saying he was going to avail himself of that, and then changed his mind. He never unfortunately came out and condemned it, but, clearly and vocally struggled with misgivings about the ethics of it. And so, we live in such a confusing time and such a, I don't know, culture of death, that, it's refreshing to see someone at least step back and ask some questions.
Right. And say, now that I'm in this position, now I'm actually having some concerns about whether or not this is an ethical thing to do to someone who has, and he had very, very good doctors and had even appealed, I think, to President Trump on Twitter because he was being denied a particular medication that I think he wound up getting, and then it did extend his life a couple of weeks, if not like a full month. But I think he was put in a position where he thought, oh my gosh, I have this. And I'm a known person and I'm having trouble getting the drugs that I need. What must it be for somebody who isn't nationally known, and doesn't have the kind of influence I have to be able to tweet at the president and get a response?
Right.
And I think too, of all the sort of fellow, tech guys and, because a lot of engineers and tech people, he really made a space for them when he first started the Dilbert cartoon, that, the people that we all called the nerds, and the Revenge of the Nerds movie was very, popular at the time. And he kind of gave them some self-respect, I think. So a lot of them followed him. And I think he was influential in that particular group of people who tend to be men. And so I pray that maybe this did have some influence on some of them in a good way, that maybe some of them will say, oh, who's Blaise Pascal? And maybe go and look at what it was that he was suggesting and who Jesus Christ was. And if even just one person comes to know Jesus Christ through that, then I'm grateful to Scott Adams for that.
Right. Well, there's a lot of other issues in the news this week that have to do with identity and gender. And we had a big Supreme Court case that came up this week. Ashley, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, the Supreme Court was weighing the question of whether or not states can bar biological males from competing against female athletes. And it's been a really divisive issue. The court seemed very much poised to uphold the rights of states to protect women's sports. So that's great. Justice Alito, in classic Justice Alito style, did a kind of ninja takedown of the attorney who was arguing the opposite position, that biological males should be allowed to compete in women's sports. I mean, this is an issue that polls very heavily in favor of protecting women's sports. It's actually one of the few issues that people are united around politically. I mean, it's like in the 75 to 80, depending on the poll, percent range of Americans agree that women should have a right to sports, to compete in sports against other women. They should have the right to compete in a fair playing field. Anyways, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I think it would be really healthy for the country if the Supreme Court comes out with a strong ruling on this to kind of help calm the nerves on this issue that's just been so polarizing, so much sport coverage given to. So we'll see what happens with that. But I was kind of reflecting on it. I wrote a book about this 10 years ago. I can't believe it's been 10 years since I wrote a book about sex differences. I have a whole section on sports. And I remember at the time when I was writing the book, this was at the very beginning when we were first starting to hear, just like, it was amazing how quickly it kind of blew up. But it was like, it seemed so insane that I would have to triple check sources and make sure this wasn't being, blown up or reported on inaccurately. But the idea that a boy could say, well, I self-identify as a female now, so I'm going to compete on the women's track team and basically obliterate the records and things like that. So it seemed crazy then. and then it really went off the rails, and now it seems like there's a bit of a return to sanity. I have to think that a lot of parents who've seen their daughters who've, worked for years and years and years, just be pushed aside, much like what happened in that famous swim meet where somebody like these incredible female athletes who've devoted most of their life to this sport are just in one race, just, pushed off the podium. So, but I was reflecting on the fact that it was a woman who argued the case, and this kind of segues a little bit into the Substack piece. But feminism has really gone off the rails, because imagine 50 years ago telling somebody that it would be a woman who would stand before the Supreme Court and argue that men should have the right to compete against female athletes. What? But that's
Yeah,
where we are.
I don't think it's as much feminism as progressivism, because I totally understand what you're saying. But I just think it's a certain zeitgeist of rights, rights, rights. I still go back to Marianne Glendon's amazing book, Rights Talk, and everybody should read that book. And, she goes back to John Locke and all these early American thinkers and British thinkers on, it's just like, how do you decide when someone else's rights trample on yours?
Yeah, and progressivism is unmoored by any kind of moral philosophy. So you're right. What ends up happening is the people with power, the more powerful class, is going to use their rights to trample on others, and that's what abortion is. It's just the strong versus the weak. It's actually really unoriginal. That was always something that made me sad about Justice Ginsburg. Is she was such an intelligent and accomplished woman. She talked a lot actually about motherhood in a very positive light. And it was just unfortunate. And I know she was really kind of at the forefront of advancing women's rights. Especially in workplace, with workplace discrimination, things like that. But unfortunately, her legacy is tainted by the fact that she then became an advocate of the very thing she was arguing against, which is this idea that the rights of one class do not depend on the rights of the other to oppress it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what's, I think part and parcel of the argument there is that the child is a burden, and that when the child is created, that child already has its own dignity, its own rights, to use the legal term. And those rights can't be superseded by somebody else just because that person is inconvenient. And so to do the very same things to unborn children that men had done to women for so many years, and then to make an excuse for it, the irony is astounding. But it also, I think, it goes to show that the way in which we treat vulnerable people, whether that's people at the end of their lives, right, to the assisted suicide debate, to somehow make this argument that other people know what's best for you. Well, you hear that, well, they're just going to be abused and live in poverty anyway. Well, how do you know that? And it's funny because when you talk to people who were raised in adverse circumstances, for example, like Clarence Thomas, they're like, I can hear you when you say that. I'm a justice of the Supreme Court now, and I was born in a house that didn't have indoor plumbing, and I had no father at home. But look what God did with my life, And so when you say things, you're saying that to people like me that really we shouldn't have been here because we didn't have the kind of life early on, or maybe for most of our lives, that met with your standards. It's really, it's not only just, a way of demeaning a class of people, but it's also very classist. There's a very classist undertone in all of this, that for people who claim to be, all about the little person, it's really quite striking, isn't it?
It is. And Ashley, I want to go back to something that you said. Tell us the name of your book. And I know that you said that this really hurts women the most. And can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. So the name of the book is Sex Scandal: The Drive to Abolish Male and Female. And it's actually not so much about, I don't even really, the word transgender doesn't appear in the book. It goes back, takes even another step back, which is the denial of just the differences between men and women. Like, even for people who accept that biologically we're different, I think that there's the strong, leftover currents of second wave feminism, which is this attempt to androgynize the sexes, because sex difference is viewed as inferiority, and that the way women, well, what I argue is that, the problem is that their solution is to make women more like men. But no, the kind of thesis of my book is that gender ideology and denying the differences between the sexes disproportionately hurts women.
And why is that?
Well, look at the military, for example. I have a whole chapter on the military, and I talk about the fact that, and this was all unfolding when I wrote the book, they lifted the ban on women in combat. And the argument was that this was discriminating against women. So as a result, all of the branches of the military basically fell in line, except the Marines, which were worried. And so they conducted their own study to see what happened with mixed sex tactical combat units. And they found that women were injured at dramatically higher rates. In other words, you put a woman in the same, and these are not ordinary women. These are extremely strong women, that they are significantly more likely to get injured, and the implication would be die in the real world,
Wow.
war theater. And it's like, so I had a line in there, something like it's like equal opportunity to fight, but I don't remember exactly how I put it, but basically unequal opportunity of survival. And that's just a denial of the reality. And that's not to say that women don't have extraordinary things to offer the military. I mean, nobody's talking about taking women out of the military, but thinking about what are the strengths that women have that you can utilize without putting them at risk. But also, to tie back to the Supreme Court case, I mean, you wipe out the word sex, and this is literally what the Biden administration did. They took, and the Obama administration, and the Trump administration reversed it. They took the Title IX language and they just replaced sex with gender.
Right.
Okay, but what does gender mean? That's the problem. Nobody can define what gender is. Sex has a very clear textbook definition that's actually used in medical textbooks. But you take that out, and suddenly, what is the legal standing of women? And that is one of my arguments, is that women basically have no legal status when you replace sex with gender. And that was teased out in the oral arguments. Justice Alito asked the attorney, how can we talk about discrimination on the basis of sex if we can't define what sex is? And the problem is that women are the ones who need a clear legal definition of sex, because we are the ones who are discriminated against. I mean, all of these fights about workplace discrimination, they all hinge on the fact that, the starting point is a clear understanding of the demarcation of male and female. So that's what I was getting at, is just that women, we stand to lose a lot of progress and hard-fought rights. And I'm not talking about quote-unquote reproductive rights. I'm talking about just actual legal rights when you wipe away clear understandings of sex in the law. And look at what happened to women's sports.
Recently, just the longtime chaplain of the Loyola men's basketball team, Sister Jean Dolores Schmidt, died, and she wrote a book called Wake Up with Purpose. And she was quite the basketball aficionado. She would do scouting reports. I mean, she knew her stuff in terms of men's basketball, but also when she played, she noted as a young woman, she played women's basketball, but women could only play half court.
Oh, I remember
It was
that.
thought that first court full. Do you remember that, Betsy?
Yes.
Full court basketball would be too difficult for women to do. I mean, and that's within the lifetime of somebody sitting right here and people we know. And so when you think of the progress, like you say, to your point, Ashley, that women have made in sports, it's astounding to me that we would want, that after Roe was overturned, right? Like all the celebrities out there saying we're not going back. Well, I feel like this is we're not going back. I'm not going back to half court basketball. And, that sort of nonsense, and no funding for the girls' teams, because some men who, I believe have psychological issues, believe that they're women.
Right. Well, I want to go back to, Ashley mentioned her Substack, which I want to give a shout out for. And the title of it is The Freudian Feminist Myth About Motherhood is failing women.
Mm,
Why children are companions, Mary, this goes back to what you said, not
mm,
obstacles to the intellectual life. And
mm.
so, Ashley, you wrote this in response to two pieces that came out in the last 2 weeks. Tell us why you wrote it and what some of your main topics are, points are.
Sure. So, the first piece that caught my attention was in the Dispatch called What Betty Friedan Got Wrong About Motherhood. And this, I mean, Betty Friedan has been revisited and rehashed so many times, but it was the first time I had a new takeaway. The author made a lot of points, but one of them was that she had a low. First of all, one of the things she said was that she had kind of a victimhood mentality, and that struck me because this is a real problem right now with. I think it's an offshoot of progressivism. I'm a victim. It's about oppressor and oppressed, which is kind of Marxist. But also, there's this real victimhood mentality that people are internalizing, and it's making them have real mental health struggles. And this is something Jonathan Haidt has talked about. But feminism really has a strong victimhood mentality to it that I think is really toxic. And so I had never thought about the fact that Betty Friedan herself was depressed and consider herself a victim, and that would really infuse the tone of second wave feminism. But also she talks about how she thinks Betty Friedan had what she called a low anthropology of children, which is that they're just kind of these dumb nuisances that make us dumber. And look, moms with toddlers can understand how at the end of the day sometimes your brain feels a little scrambled, but it really the author really talks about the fact that children are intellectual vessels and have a great capacity for intellect, and that they can be companions. And I find this to be so true myself as my children get older and want to discuss things with me. And sometimes I'm like, guys, I don't want to debate this right now. I mean, children really do have a great capacity for learning, and that is one facet of the intellectual life. And women can choose to pursue academics or career in a different way. But even if they don't, they're still, if their mothers are blessed to be surrounded by little budding intellects.
Yeah.
And
so Betty Friedan called that the problem that has no name. And there is a part of me that thinks about, if you end up in the suburbs, in a subdivision, and you're alone in your house all day. I mean, I do think that some of her critiques, the answer is to have a spiritual life. Right. And the answer is to have a community of women. And I think that part of the problem is that maybe some of the critiques were valid, but the answer, which is just, to contracept or abort because children are problems, is really, tragic. And Nadia Williams, who wrote the Dispatch speech that you're talking about, she had a great part. Do you remember that, Ashley, where she talked about drudgery and how, because Betty Friedan talks about drudgery. She says, each suburban wife struggled with it alone as she made the beds, shopped for groceries, matched slipcover material, ate peanut butter sandwiches with her children. She was afraid to ask even herself or her husband, is this all? And what Nadia Williams says is, I'm an academic, and believe me, checking papers is its own kind of drudgery. I mean, it's just part of the human condition, right?
Yeah, no, and it's like, there are some men with some very glorious careers, but, probably most men, even with very interesting, sophisticated careers, would describe a good percentage of what they do as drudgery. And so, it's a great point. And I've always come back to this line that Leon Cass said at an AEI when he got the AEI award, gosh, more than a decade ago, where he said basically we don't put enough emphasis on when we are humanly at work, and that's the work of the home. And I think we're doing a better job of engaging men in that work than when Betty Friedan wrote her book. But it's really important, satisfying work that is highly devalued in a hyper individualistic capitalist, like runaway capitalist, no beef with capitalism, but runaway materialistic
Right.
society that just doesn't value that human work.
Well, and this is one of the contributions of Vatican II, I think, is that all of our work, if we offer it to God as a sacrifice, can be sanctifying. And I think that was one of the sort of genius insights of Saint Jose Maria Escriva of Opus Dei, was that whether or not you work in a dry cleaner or you're a teacher or you're a mom at home with your kids, everything that you do is important, and we achieve our sanctity through our work. So not to look at work as if this thing that demeans us, but rather, it's our work that brings about our sanctity. However, I do think, to Friedan's point, I think of that old ad, and this is what the singer Mary Chapin Carpenter based her very popular song, He Thinks He'll Keep Her. There was an actual ad where a guy comes home from work and he says, "Look at my beautiful wife." And of course, this woman's all coiffed up and, she has a fabulous dinner on the table. She took the kids to swimming lessons and she cleaned the house and she even made me this hot dinner. I think I'll keep her. I mean, that was an actual ad in the 1970s. And Mary Chapin Carpenter said when she remembers seeing it and her mother being so angry, but that was the basis for her song, He Thinks He'll Keep Her. So I do think, she had, and this is oftentimes where these destructive policies come about, right? There's a kernel of truth in some of them, right?
Right.
Women, our work was disrespected. We weren't thought of as someone who should be as educated as their male counterparts, which was one of the great contributions of St. Thomas More, who educated his daughters in the very same way he educated his sons.
Margaret
And the
Roper.
church, the Catholic Church, has been out in front of that. Who were the first university presidents? Who were the first hospital presidents? They were Catholic sisters. And so women were educated in our faith, but that was so that we could help form new saints.
Right. Ashley, you also quoted another person, Dr. Sarah Pogge, in your article, and she talks about the unforgiving truths about science. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because it was a great part of your piece.
Yeah, so that was also interesting. There has definitely been a concerted effort that I've seen in the last, 5 years, to undermine the scientific reality about female biology and be like,
Right.
oh no, this is a myth. And she kind of is coming out both in an empathetic way, as a doctor who's dealt a maternal fetal medicine doctor who's dealt with a lot of women struggling to conceive late in life.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of these are women who just married later, and this is a reality of our life, or our reality. But also as an authority figure, kind of correcting the record and saying no, that these are the truths and this is not something that you want to put off. And it's just something that's so important for people to hear. And she even cites Charlie Kirk, who she says she disagrees with on every single issue except his admonition to young people to have kids younger. And so I just found that to be refreshing. And she also echoed what the other author said about children being such a fulfilling part of her life, and as a widow herself, her gratitude for having children younger, because also viewing them as wonderful companions into adulthood.
Well, listeners, if you'd like to check out Ashley McGuire's terrific piece, The Freudian Feminist Myth About Motherhood, please check out our TCA Substack, Why Children Are Companions, Not Obstacles to the Intellectual Life, also available there. And then to read and follow our latest pieces on Substack, make sure to subscribe to the Catholic Conversations with Consequences with the Catholic Association, available on substack.com. And to learn more about the Catholic Association, visit thecatholicassociation.org to follow everything we do in radio, TV, print, online, and in our local communities. This has been Mary Fiorito, Betsy Fentress, and Ashley McGuire. Thank you for joining us today.